The sun was already high over the coastal town when Charles Wentworth, owner of the luxurious Rosehill Grand Hotel, made his usual morning rounds. Tall, polished, and always dressed to impress, Charles was the kind of boss everyone watched from a distance. Though respected, he was known for being reserved, especially with staff. That morning, the lobby buzzed with activity. Guests checked out, bellhops hustled, and cleaners moved quickly between floors. Charles greeted a few regulars, sipped his coffee, and nodded politely to workers as he passed. Everything seemed normal, until he heard a little voice from behind the front desk. "Dad?" Charles stopped mid-step. The word didn't register right away. He turned slowly, brows furrowed. There, near the ficus plant by the reception, stood a girl about 6 years old. Curly hair tied in pink ribbons. A little hotel uniform shirt tucked into jeans. She was holding a stack of coloring books. "Excuse me," Charles said, trying to steady his voice. The girl smiled brightly, pointed up the hallway toward the housekeeping wing, and added, "Mom said you're my dad." The entire lobby fell silent. A front desk clerk dropped a pen. Even the background music seemed to pause. Charles felt his chest tighten. His eyes darted to the elevator, then to the hallway, and finally, to the girl. "Who's your mom?" he asked quietly. The girl answered with a name he hadn't expected in years. "Rosa," the girl said innocently. "Rosa Santiago. She cleans the rooms on the 3rd floor." Charles's expression didn't change, but inside, his thoughts were racing. He hadn't heard that name in almost 7 years. He cleared his throat and forced a small smile. "Where is your mother now?" The girl pointed toward the service elevator. "She said she'd be back in 5 minutes. She left me here to wait for her." Charles nodded, then glanced toward the staff hallway. A few employees had paused nearby, pretending to check their phones or clean already spotless counters, clearly eavesdropping. He leaned down. "What's your name?" "Luna," the girl beamed. "Like the moon." The name struck him like thunder. Luna. He remembered the night Rosa had told him she liked that name if she ever had a daughter. But that was years ago, back when she worked late shifts and he'd occasionally stay behind, helping organize linen records, as they both joked. Charles stood up quickly and walked toward his office, motioning to his assistant. "Get Rosa Santiago," he said calmly. "Have her meet me in my office. Now." He stepped inside, shut the door behind him, and for the first time in years, locked it. His hands trembled. Not from fear, but from the weight of something he thought he had buried a long time ago. He whispered to himself, "She never told me." Rosa Santiago was wiping down a marble sink in room 312 when a fellow housekeeper poked her head in. "Boss wants to see you. Now." In his office, she said quietly, almost cautiously. Rosa paused, her heart skipping. She knew that tone, it meant something unusual. She quickly removed her gloves, smoothed her uniform, and made her way downstairs, her nerves tightening with each step. By the time she reached Charles's office, she could feel her palms sweating. She knocked twice. No answer. Then she heard his voice. "Come in." Rosa stepped inside, and the door closed behind her with a quiet click. Charles stood by the window, hands in his pockets, gazing out at the ocean. For a long moment, he didn't turn around. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and strained. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" Rosa's breath caught. She didn't have to ask what he meant. She took a deep breath. "Because you had your life, Charles. And I had mine." Now he turned. His eyes looked different, less cold, more human. "She called me Dad." In the middle of the lobby, he said, trying to process the surreal moment. "Is it true?" Rosa nodded slowly. "Yes. She's yours." Charles ran a hand through his hair and sat down, looking more shaken than Rosa had ever seen him. All these years. You just disappeared. I didn't disappear, Rosa replied, her voice steady but soft. You promoted me to nights, then stopped coming around. And when I found out I was pregnant, I knew you wouldn't want it interfering with your reputation. So I left it alone. Silence filled the room. I didn't think I mattered to you, not really, she added. I wasn't going to beg you to be a father. Charles leaned back, staring at the ceiling, as if the truth was too heavy to look at head-on. And then, very quietly, he asked, does she know anything else about me? Rosa looked him straight in the eyes. She knows your name. And that you love coffee with too much cream. Charles let out a breath, part laugh, part sigh. I still take it that way, he murmured. The room fell into another long pause. Rosa stood with her arms crossed, unsure of whether to stay or go. Finally, Charles gestured to the chair across from him. Please. Sit. She hesitated, then complied. You should have told me, he said again, but softer now. You think I wouldn't have wanted to know? Rosa shook her head gently. You were climbing ladders, Charles. Board meetings. Investors. A child from a hotel cleaner wouldn't have fit the image. Charles flinched, as if hearing it aloud made it more real. She's bright, you know, Rosa continued. Luna. Smarter than her age. She reads everything, and she asks questions, so many questions. She's got your stubbornness, too. He allowed a faint smile to form. Sounds like a handful. She is, Rosa said, the corner of her mouth curling up. But she's also the best thing that ever happened to me. Charles stared at the floor, then looked up at her with something vulnerable in his eyes. Does she think I love her? Rosa hesitated. She thinks you're a mystery, she said carefully. A man with a nice suit and tired eyes who walks past her without noticing. But when she asked if I ever loved anyone, I told her yes. Once. Charles blinked slowly. You said that? I did, she whispered. Outside, the ocean wind picked up, rattling the window slightly. Inside, a wall between two people started to crack, just a little. Charles leaned forward. Rosa, is there still time to be part of her life? Rosa looked down. That depends, she said. Are you ready to be more than just a man in a suit? The question hung in the air like a weight. Charles didn't answer right away. Instead, he stared at his hands, hands that signed paychecks, struck deals, controlled empires. But not once had they held his daughter. I don't know how to be a father, he admitted finally. Not with the way I was raised. Not with the life I've lived. Rosa's gaze softened. No one does at first. But it's not about being perfect. It's about showing up. Charles looked up, something shifting behind his eyes. She deserves the truth. She deserves a chance, Rosa corrected. And so do you. He stood up slowly and walked to the door. Where is she now? In the break room, coloring, Rosa replied. Charles opened the door but stopped just before stepping out. Will she be okay seeing me again so soon? Rosa smiled. She's been waiting 6 years. I think she'll be fine. He nodded and walked down the hallway, past curious glances from staff. His steps felt heavier than usual, not from shame, but from the responsibility he was finally choosing to carry. As he reached the break room door, he paused and looked through the small glass window. Luna sat at a round table, her feet swinging, crayon in hand, drawing a picture of a man and a girl holding hands beneath a giant sun. He took a breath, then knocked gently. Her head popped up. Her eyes widened. And before he could say a word, she smiled and said, "Hi, Dad." This time, he didn't freeze. He walked in, knelt beside her, and replied, "Hi, Luna. I've been meaning to meet you properly. Somewhere behind him, Rosa watched quietly, her hand on her chest, a tear slipping down her cheek. The truth was finally out, and somehow, it was the beginning of something better. Luna reached into her coloring book, tore out the page with the sun and the two figures, and held it out shyly. "This is us," she said. "I didn't know how tall you were, so I made you taller than the sun." Charles took the drawing with care, as if it were more valuable than anything in his bank vaults. "It's perfect," he said softly, his voice catching just slightly. They sat together, and for the next few minutes, Charles listened, really listened, as Luna talked about her favorite cartoons, her best friend at school, and how she didn't like green beans. Each word stitched something back into his soul he hadn't realized was missing. Rosa eventually stepped into the room, not to interrupt, but simply to join. She placed a small lunchbox in front of Luna, kissed her on the forehead, and looked at Charles with a quiet strength. "Being in her life doesn't mean you get to drop in and out," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I know," Charles replied without hesitation. "If you'll let me. I want to be there. I want to learn." Rosa studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Then start by picking her up from school tomorrow." He smiled, surprised by the simplicity of the offer. "What time?" 3:15 sharp. "She'll be waiting." Charles stood and turned to Luna. "Would you like that?" Luna grinned. "Only if we can get ice cream after." He laughed. "Deal." As they left the break room together, Rosa, Luna, and Charles side by side, there were no dramatic speeches, no crowds watching, no breaking news. Just a quiet, powerful moment of truth. A daughter who had always deserved to be seen. A mother who never stopped protecting. And a man who finally chose presence over pride. Sometimes, the most unexpected truths don't break families apart, they finally bring them together. A week later, the Rose Hill Grand felt subtly different. The staff whispered less and smiled more when Charles passed by. Not because he had changed into someone else, but because he was finally becoming someone real. He no longer rushed through the lobby without eye contact. He asked about people's families. He even learned a few names he'd never bothered to before. Every afternoon at exactly 3:15, his silver car pulled up to Westbrook Elementary. Luna always ran out first, waving a crayon-colored paper like a flag of victory. They started a little tradition, ice cream, then a short walk along the pier, where Luna would ask her endless stream of questions. One day, she asked, "Why did you and Mommy stop talking?" Charles paused. He knelt down beside her, looking her straight in the eyes. "Because I made a mistake," he said honestly. "But I'm trying to make it right now." Luna thought for a second, then held his hand tighter. "Okay. Just don't make it again." "I won't," he promised. And he meant it. Back at the hotel, Rosa received an unexpected promotion, not because of their history, but because she deserved it. Charles made sure of that. Quietly, without favors, without fanfare. Just fairness. Some nights, after Luna went to bed, Rosa and Charles would talk again, really talk. Not about the past, but about what might come next. Slowly, piece by piece, they were rebuilding something new. Not a romance. Not yet. But a friendship built on truth, respect, and the child they shared. For the first time in years, Charles didn't feel alone in the world he built. Because somewhere between the marble floors and the hidden regrets, he'd found something he never expected. Family Point. One Saturday afternoon, the Rose Hill Grand hosted its annual Family Day, a light-hearted event where staff could bring their children for games, food, and music. It was usually a modest affair, tucked into the back garden, but this year felt different. Charles personally oversaw the setup. He made sure the cotton candy machine worked, that every child got a goodie bag, and that Luna had the biggest balloon animal in the shape of a unicorn. When Rosa arrived with Luna in hand, Charles greeted them both at the gate, not as the hotel boss, but as a father. Staff members exchanged surprised glances. Charles Wentworth, who once barely nodded at birthdays, was now running a sack race in dress shoes, with Luna cheering him on. Later in the afternoon, a magician called for a volunteer. Luna's hand shot up. "I'll go," she shouted, running on stage. The magician chuckled. "All right, what's your name, brave assistant?" "Luna Santiago Wentworth," she declared proudly, loud enough for everyone to hear. A hush swept the crowd. Rosa froze. Charles, standing off to the side, blinked in disbelief. She had never used his name before, not even privately. He locked eyes with Rosa across the lawn. She looked stunned, then nodded. Not in protest. In agreement. That small nod meant everything. Luna had made her choice, not just in name, but in heart. She saw him. As a father. As part of her life. And for the first time since the hotel opened its doors, Charles Wentworth felt like he truly belonged inside them. Not just as the man who built the walls, but as someone finally living inside them, with love. That evening, after the last of the streamers were swept away and the laughter faded into quiet echoes, Charles stood alone on the rooftop terrace of the Rosehill Grand. He looked down at the garden where the family day had taken place. The chairs were stacked. The lights were dim. But in his mind, he could still hear Luna's voice ringing out, "Santiago Wentworth." He turned as Rosa stepped onto the terrace behind him, her hair tied back, her expression soft but unreadable. "She chose that name on her own," Rosa said quietly, joining him at the railing. "I didn't ask her to," Charles replied. "I never even told her it was an option." "I know," Rosa said. "That's why it means more." They stood in silence, the ocean breeze brushing past like a memory. Below them, the hotel's golden lights shimmered against the sea. "Do you regret it?" he finally asked. "Any of it?" Rosa shook her head. "I regret not giving you the chance to know her sooner. But I don't regret protecting her. Or raising her to be brave enough to speak her truth." Charles nodded, looking out into the horizon. "She saved me," he said, voice low. "That little girl. She made me face everything I've avoided. Everything I buried." Rosa gave him a quiet smile. "She has a way of doing that." He turned to her, more honest than he'd ever been. "Can we try again?" he asked. "Not for us. Not yet. But as a team, for her." Rosa thought for a moment, then extended her hand. "We already are." He took it. For the first time, their past didn't feel like a weight. It felt like a foundation, messy, cracked, but strong enough to build something better. Below them, Luna's drawing from earlier, two figures beneath a blazing sun, fluttered against the terrace table. Except now, in marker, she had added a third person. A woman. Standing beside them. Family. Chosen. Real. Finally whole. Months passed, and the rhythm of their new life found its pace. Charles no longer lived solely for boardrooms and balance sheets. Instead, his calendar had school events circled in red, afternoons blocked out for piano recitals, and weekends marked with words like "Luna time." The hotel staff saw a change too. The once distant owner now lingered longer in the kitchen to ask about someone's grandmother. He ate lunch in the break room once a week. And every now and then, he'd show up with Luna, who marched proudly beside him, greeting employees like royalty. Rosa thrived in her new role as housekeeping supervisor. She ran the department with efficiency and empathy, and earned every bit of respect on her own merit. One quiet Sunday morning, Charles and Rosa sat on a bench outside the hotel as Luna played with a jump rope nearby. Charles held a letter in his hands. It was from Luna's school, a request for the father's name to be added officially to her records. She told her teacher herself, Rosa said with a small laugh. Told her she had 2 last names now. Like a superhero. Charles smiled, his eyes soft. Do you think it's too much? No, Rosa said gently. I think it's exactly enough. He signed the form. Luna ran over moments later, a little out of breath. Are you done with your boring papers? She asked. Charles chuckled. Yes, superhero. What's next? Pancakes, she declared. Big ones. With blueberries. As they walked off toward the hotel cafe, hand in hand, the morning sun caught the gold-lettered hotel sign above the entrance. The Rose Hill Grand, unchanged on the outside. But within its walls, a story had unfolded, not of scandal, not of betrayal, but of truth, second chances, and a little girl who redefined what family meant. And in the end, the real luxury wasn't the marble floors or rooftop views. It was love, finally recognized, finally embraced. Where silence once lived, laughter echoed. And where secrets once divided, a new legacy had begun.